My father died on a Tuesday in November. It rained all morning. He left me exactly two things, and no instructions for either one. The first was a folder, thick with debt. $23,400 he had never once mentioned to me, not even at the very end. The second was his name. Just his name. And for about 3 weeks, sitting alone in his quiet house, I honestly could not tell you which one of those two things scared me more. Because here's what nobody warns you about. When a parent dies, you don't just bury them. You inherit everything they ever were. The bills they hid away in a drawer, and the reputation they spent a whole lifetime building in a town that never forgot a face. And one of those two things ended up making me richer than money ever could. I just didn't understand which one. Not until a stranger I had never met in my life knocked on my front door. If you're young, I want you to write this part down, because school is never going to teach it to you. You'll end up learning it the hard way instead. Usually in a funeral home parking lot, holding a stack of envelopes you're afraid to even open. I almost made a $20,000 mistake out of pure grief and pure ignorance. Please, don't be me. Stay with me all the way to the end. Because the part that truly changed my life is the part that almost everybody gets completely backwards. I'm going to tell you the whole thing. The late-night calls from the collectors. The truth about debt that the people on the other end of the line were praying I'd never find out. And the quiet afternoon, a man I had never met paid off a debt I didn't even know my father was carrying. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what to protect when it feels like you have almost nothing left. And why the single smartest thing my dad ever did cost him exactly $0. Let me take you back to that kitchen table. My dad, Raymond, though everybody in town just called him Ray, was a quiet man. He fixed roofs for 40 years. Never bragged about a single job. Never once explained himself to anybody. So, when he passed, I expected maybe a small savings account, a little something tucked away. Instead, I found a shoebox. Medical bills from his last year, a loan on his old work truck, and 3 credit cards he'd been quietly juggling just to keep the lights on while he was too sick to climb a ladder. I sat there at 2 in the morning, the refrigerator humming in the dark, feeling something I'm ashamed of now. I was angry at a dead man. $23,400. I was 31 years old, barely making my own rent, and suddenly certain I'd be paying off my father's mistakes for the next 10 years of my life. For 2 solid weeks, I didn't really sleep. I did the math over and over at that table, moving the numbers around like they might somehow shrink if I just stared at them long enough. Then the phone call started. A collector called me at work, and said, in this soft, practiced voice I will never forget, "Son, your daddy would want you to do the right thing." My stomach just dropped through the floor. I almost read him my card number right there on the spot. So here's the lesson nobody ever taught me. The one I'm handing to you right now, for free. In the United States, in most cases, you do not inherit your parents' debt. When someone passes away, their debts are paid out of their estate. That's the money and property they leave behind, and nothing more than that. Think of the estate as its own separate pocket. The bills come out of that pocket first, in a set order, and when that pocket runs empty, in most cases, the story simply ends there. It does not reach across the table and into your pocket. Not unless you co-signed the loan, or shared the account, or live somewhere with special rules. I didn't know any of that. So I sat there, terrified of a number that was never legally mine to carry in the first place. And that collector, the one gently telling me to do the right thing? Under federal law, something called the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, it is actually illegal for a collector to suggest you're personally on the hook for a debt that isn't yours, and illegal to harass you over it. They were counting on my grief. They were counting on me not knowing the rules of the game. I didn't know them. But now you do. And that one single fact is worth more than everything else in this video. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and I want to say that part plainly. Every family and every estate is a little different, and for anything serious, you sit down with a real attorney. But here is what I did. I called the legal aid office in my own county. I read the actual government websites, the CFPB, the FTC. Not a forwarded text message, and not some stranger's threat over the phone. The real rules, in plain English. And the shape of the whole thing turned out to be this. The fear they sell you is almost always far bigger than the bill itself. $23,000, I was sure, would crush me. And legally, most of it was never going to touch me at all. That folder lost its power over me the very day I finally understood how it actually worked. So that was the debt. The thing that screamed at me for 3 long weeks. Now, let me tell you about the other thing my father left me. Because this, right here, is exactly where the whole story quietly turns around. And it begins, of all places, with a knock at the door. About a month after the funeral, a man knocked on my door. An older fella, work boots, holding his hat in both his hands, the way men of that generation do when they've got something serious to say. He looked at me and said, "You're Ray's boy." Then, "Your dad climbed up and re-roofed my mother's house in the winter of '88, when she had no money, no husband, and a baby in the next room. He never once sent her a bill. I've waited 30 years to pay that man back." And he pressed an envelope into my hand. I just stood there, frozen in the doorway, not knowing what on earth to say. Inside was cash and a note in shaky handwriting that simply read, "Thank you, Ray." And then it just kept happening. The man at the hardware store started quietly knocking down the price on everything I bought that whole year, and waving me off whenever I asked why. The loan officer at the little bank downtown, when I finally walked in there terrified about that truck loan, she looked at the account, then she looked up at me, and she said, "Your father's word was good in this town for 40 years. We'll work something out." I hadn't asked a single one of them for a thing. And that, right there, is the truth about a good name. It shows up for you exactly when you've got nothing left to offer in return. And it hit me, standing right there in the middle of that bank lobby. My father had spent his entire life making deposits into an account I couldn't even see. Every roof he fixed honestly. Every bill he never padded by a dime. Every promise he kept when there was absolutely no one around to watch him keep it. For years, I'd quietly thought the man had nothing left to teach me about money. But he had been building something the whole time. Something the schools never even put a name to. Reputation. Trust. A good name. And unlike the cash in that shoebox, it didn't die the day he did. It came looking for me. And that's the part most people get completely backwards. We spend our whole lives obsessed with the number in the bank account. The one thing that actually gets buried right alongside us. And we treat our own name, our word, like it's free, like it costs nothing to spend. But your reputation is the one and only kind of wealth that keeps paying out long after you're gone. On paper, my father died flat broke. In the way that actually counts, in that little town, he was one of the richest men I have ever known. So, here is what I want you to carry out of this. The young ones especially. My nieces, my nephews, anybody just starting out and quietly feeling like they're already behind? Just 3 things. Write them on the back of your hand if you have to. 1. Learn how money and the law actually work before somebody uses your not knowing against you. Know what you owe. And just as importantly, know what you don't. Know that a debt collector on the phone is not your judge and not your boss. And know that a single signature, co-signing a loan for a friend, a partner, even someone you love dearly, can make a debt legally yours when it never would have been otherwise. Read the paper before you sign it. Ask out loud who's responsible if the other person can't pay. Keep your records in one place. Nobody hands you this in a classroom, so let an old man hand it to you here. The cheap way, instead of the expensive one. 2. Guard your name like it's the only inheritance that's truly guaranteed to outlive you. Because it is. Keep your word, even the small ones. Especially the small ones. Pay back the kindnesses people forget they ever did for you. Do the right thing when there is absolutely no one around to clap for you. And I'll be honest with you. It does not feel like building wealth while you're doing it. It just feels like being decent. And some days it feels like being a fool. But it compounds, quietly, for decades. And one day it shows up at the front door of somebody you love, long after you're gone, holding an envelope. 3. When you go to measure a life, your own, or the life of somebody you've just lost, don't only count the dollars. Count the people who would stand up and vouch for them. Count the doors their name still quietly opens. My father's estate was almost nothing on paper, just that shoebox and an old truck. But the richest thing he ever left me was never going to fit inside a shoebox in the first place. I keep that shoebox on a shelf out in my garage now. It's empty. I finally cleared out the last of the paper a long time ago. The debt screamed at me for 3 weeks straight. The reputation never once raised its voice. It just whispered, quietly, in the voices of strangers who happened to know my dad. And it turned out that whisper was worth more than the scream was ever going to be. So, let me ask you something. And I really do want you to tell me down in the comments. What did your parents, or your grandparents, leave you that had nothing at all to do with money? A saying they always repeated? A skill they put into your hands? A good name you're still quietly living up to? Whatever it is, write it down tonight, before it's gone. If this story meant something to you, go ahead and subscribe to Last Generation Stories, where we try to pass the wisdom down before it's gone for good. And do me just one favor before you go to sleep tonight. Call your dad, if you still can. Tell him thank you. Because some debts you actually do want to inherit.